Ladies and gentlemen, Sidestrafe back with another look at World of Tanks. Of course, as most of you are aware, version 9.0 has released, and with it comes a few new high poly count tank models, which Wargaming are calling HD. And of course, we're looking at one of my favorite tanks in-game and in real life, the Centurion Mark 7/1. And in this match, I was joined by Bombadil of No Guts, No Galaxy, and he was rolling out in his M103 American heavy tank, which has also had the HD treatment. Now, this first replay was, of course, just our way of showcasing some of the new HD tanks. And after this, we'll take a look at some historical matchups. Now, I want you to keep in mind that platooning doesn't currently work within this version of World of Tanks when you are playing historical battles. The best you can do is try to sync drop by perhaps counting down over voice comms and hitting the battle button at the same time. I can vouch for the success of that tactic in the Battle of the Bulge scenario if you're playing as the Americans. However, as Germans, or perhaps even Russians in some cases in some of the other battles, it might not work out for you, and you'll just have to test it. Also, keep in mind that as historical battles has just rolled out, not everyone is aware of its implementation, and I think that the queue times might be a little long in the beginning. Now, back on the topic of the HD tanks, I will admit I am actually quite impressed with how they're looking, and it's not just the fact that they're a higher poly count. That's one thing. Anybody can really do that. But it's the shader system that they're using that really truly impresses me. If you take a look at one of their behind-the-scenes videos, you can see that they're using a piece of equipment on actual tanks. They're going into these tank museums and they're scanning the metal or the surfaces of these tanks to get the texture or the feel of the metal, the casting or the welding of these tanks, and then apply that in-game on their models, and it looks absolutely fantastic. I can't see any other games using this type of technique, at least not yet, and I'm sure that you know, more will follow over time. Now, perhaps somebody else has done something similar to this, but I don't think I've ever seen it applied as well. And when you really rotate your camera in your garage around some of these vehicles, you can just see all the little imperfections of the metal and how the casting works and everything, and it's just fantastic to see it. And I'm just absolutely impressed, because I didn't think that this game was capable of looking any better, to be honest. In the past, a lot of the tanks felt kind of flat, or like they were made out of cardboard in some cases. And at least visually now, with some of the newer HD or high poly tanks, they're definitely kicking it up a notch. On top of all that, I believe the physics changes are something that we're all looking forward to, and starting out with a new suspension. Now, currently only the HD tank models have the improved suspension, which means that you'll actually see the road wheels bounce up and down properly as they hit different bumps or various levels of terrain. And it's really nice to see it. It might not be perfect in all aspects, but I'm sure it's something that Wargaming can tune over time. Maps are also under continued renovation, whether it's new lighting and shader techniques to completely reworked levels in regards to balance, as well as alternate maps, perhaps featuring different times of day or weather effects. Perhaps you're going from summer to winter in some cases. And I like that. I like that a developer goes back to something that thinks maybe a year down the line, you know what, this could be better. How can we fix it? How can we change it? Maybe let's add a sound effect over here. Let's change the lighting. Let's make a second version of this, but maybe it's snowing, and maybe in the future there's going to be a snowstorm, and that might affect visibility. Those are things that Wargaming has discussed, and I like that they go back to these things, that they go back to their tanks, that it's not just done. And I think that's really how you have to be successful as a business and remain competitive, of course. Now, yes, there are, of course, always going to be those maps that we absolutely despise, and for whatever reason they continue to remain. I can think of a few, But I do respect the fact that Wargaming does actually go back and retreat their maps or retreat their tanks. There aren't that many developers that go back and look at old content. There aren't that many devs that want to spend the time and the money to renovate. And I really do appreciate that. And the only other game I can think of that's gone back to old content to renovate or change something is probably a game like World of Warcraft with Cataclysm. Beyond that, it just doesn't happen that often, and whether you like wargaming or not, you do have to respect the fact that they have standards. Now, this next matchup, I am actually on my own in a historical battle in my Su-85. Now, this tank is, of course, not HD, but you can see the new shader effects applied to some of the old tank models as well, which does help out with how the metal actually looks. It's still a pretty nice technique that they've been able to apply there. Now, I want you to pay attention to the fact that in this matchup, the teams are actually even. This isn't always going to be the case. For example, in the Battle of the Bulge map that you'll see after this, you'll notice that the teams are lopsided in favor of the Americans. That is to simulate the fact that the Allies typically had more tanks than the Axis. But the Axis are going to have more powerful tanks, better armor, better guns, better at ranged fighting. So these battles can, of course, be difficult. Don't think that just because you have more tanks, you're going to win, because more often than not, that is definitely not the case. You have to play smart, you have to coordinate and communicate. Now also, pay attention to the fact that tanks are being given historical loadouts. You're not going to go into battle with a top gun, a top engine. You're allowed to bring in the equipment that you've purchased for your tank, but that's it. In fact, you'll see here that my ammunition also hasn't been chosen by myself. It's automatically chosen for you, so you're not going to go into this battle with your usual loadout, which for most people typically consists of nothing but premium ammunition. And historically speaking, high-velocity armor-piercing, or APCR, or the wide variety of other types of ammunition that were used as specialty rounds weren't readily available in World War II, especially towards the end for the Germans, where they had to resort to using standard armor-piercing ammo due to the lack of resources. Now, for those of you, of course, wondering how to get into a historical battle, just go up to your battle button at the top of your UI in the garage, hit the tab below that, and you'll see the historical option. Keep in mind that if you're platooned, this is not going to work. It'll be grayed out. And like I said at the beginning of the video, you'll have to try to synchronize your drop with a friend. And again, also, like I said in the beginning of the video, that really only seems to work in the Battle of the Bulge if you're playing as the Americans. I haven't had much success, and as you can see in this match, I'm on my own. Bombadil wasn't able to get into this matchup with me, but he'll join me again in the final portion of this video. There is a learning curve to historical battles. Don't just come into this mode expecting to play the same way that you've been playing World of Tanks for years now. You want to err on the side of caution even more than you ever have before, because you don't have your top gun, you don't have your top engine, you don't have those parts that made your tank what it is in random battles. You need to relearn older guns. You might want to even take them into a training room with a friend and test things out again. Everything else pretty much works the same. There hasn't been any changes to armor. You still have to deal with hit points. The gameplay mechanics are 100% the same. It's just that now you're dealing with dumbed down tanks in some respects. And when you're in a weaker tank against something heavy with a large gun on it, you really have to work as a team and communicate, coordinate to the best of your ability. You have to flank. You can't go in by yourself. Well, you shouldn't go in by yourself in a regular game anyway, but you really need to think about flanking a lot more and using positions to your advantage, ambushing. Think about these tactics. Read a book even on some old real-world World War II conflicts. You'll learn a lot, even in this arcadey video game called World of Tanks. There's a lot that you can learn from just reading about these altercations. And while you might not be dealing with 100% realism here, just thinking about group tactics, how tanks move together, how they cover themselves, how they use hills and terrain to protect the bulk of their tank. It's really a game of patience and strategy, and it's really simple when it comes down to it. It's just that you have to be in that right mindset. And keep in mind that not everyone is going to like historical battles. Definitely try it out. Don't be closed-minded. Give it a shot. You might end up liking it more than even random battles. Go in with a certain expectation. Read the descriptions of your tanks. Check out what loadout you're going in with. Because a lot of people are jumping into matches thinking that they're going to have the same loadout that they had in the normal game. For example, in the next battle we'll see, Battle of the Bulge, the M18 Hellcat seems to be the most popular choice. More often than not, the American team is just saturated with them, and I think it's because so many people are choosing it thinking that the Hellcat is amazing in the regular game. They love that 90mm gun and they love the speed, so they keep choosing it, not realizing that, oh, you've got your original turret, you're not as fast, and you've got the old 76mm gun that it historically had. Now, it's not horrible by any means, but don't go into a battle thinking that you're not going to have problems with that Tiger II that's out there. Because before he's done, he's probably taking 4 or 5 of your friends with him. Also, don't just blitz in like a maniac thinking that you're going to save the day with some crazy tactic that you use in the regular game. Because things are different in historical battles. You go in alone, you're just feeding the team. Especially when you're dealing with a team that's outnumbered, because psychologically they're thinking, oh, I'm threatened by a larger team. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to find somewhere to hide. I'm going to defend my flag. I'm going to get hulled down, and I'm going to take these fools out from range and let them come to me. That's what's going to happen. So yes, this historical battle's a little bit campier than most, probably. And that might be the reason you don't play it. But you know what? For those of us that understand why those things happened, this is a dream come true. So get used to it. Read a book. Because I'll tell you what, when the planets somehow align and you have that great team on your side, this is a really fun game mode. And especially if the other team is somewhat competent as well, you end up having that feeling of fear at times that you don't get in games these days. You almost get a little nervous and think, oh snap, things are different. I can't just pen this guy at his usual weak spot. I got to get around him. I got to flank him. How do we do this? In fact, playing as some of the weaker allied tanks in the game is a lot more challenging than choosing some of the Axis armor. A Tiger tank in this game is now a Tiger tank. They actually do pose some sort of threat to you because of that armor and that gun. And so I like that. To me, that's cool. And as you can see, this battle wasn't necessarily going my way, but I still had a lot of fun. And now, of course, we'll finish things off with the Battle of the Bulge historical matchup. And this is the Americans versus the Germans. And just pay attention to the fact that I'm in an Easy 8 with its historical 76mm. You can see some Hellcats in the distance as well, with their original turret and gun. And no, the matchmaker isn't broken here. The teams are lopsided for a reason. The Americans are supposed to have more tanks. That's how this mode works. Historically, the Allies had more armor on the field than the Axis, especially late in the war. In some cases, the Americans were churning out well over 2,000 Sherman tanks a month in comparison to the 200 or so tanks that the Germans were manufacturing. And so this is built to resemble that time frame. Now, it's not always perfect. Sometimes the matchmaker has a tough time pairing appropriate tanks. More often than not, you will see the American side filled with tank destroyers, or sometimes the Germans won't be given a Tiger II, and it really just depends on what the players are choosing. Creating a matchmaking service for any video game is very, very difficult, so it's always sad to see a lot of players hating on a developer for having a bad matchmaking system when they don't realize what goes into programming that kind of thing. It's not easy. In fact, it's hard to find a game that does have a perfect matchmaker, and if it was easy, then you'd see a lot more titles excelling at it. In this situation, I would say that you're seeing a lot of tank destroyers on the American side because those players think that they're going to be able to do better in those vehicles. Again, some of them aren't realizing that they don't have the top guns that they have in the normal game. In fact, in this battle, I believe only the Jackson has the 90mm main gun. Most of the other tanks, such as this Sherman EZ-8, are equipped with 76mm guns, in some cases a 75, and perhaps when you're talking about the M4, maybe even the 105, which, of course, is only really going to be effective if you're hitting the flanks of German armor, unless it's maybe a Panzer IV, and perhaps you get lucky. Now, you, of course, do have some high explosive anti-tank or APCR that you can use, but most of the time, you'll see people yelling in chat to save it for Tiger IIs. I would like to mention that the Germans currently seem to be winning about 90% of these battles, mostly because the American team will see that they have a numbers advantage and get extremely cocky. You'll see a bunch of people enter the chat and be like, haha, matchmaker messed up, we've got more tanks, we're gonna win, go USA, and yeah, they get killed easily by one tank because they just drive in overconfident and don't realize that their guns can't pen the front of a Tiger II, and that guy will be sitting pretty on a hill, taking out 4 or 5 people and laughing all the way to the bank. So do yourself and your team a favor. Don't rush in alone. Stick together. Try to communicate a little bit in chat. Call out targets. Focus fire. If somebody asks if you should cap, then the answer is always yes. If you have the opportunity to end the game with a base capture, then just do it. Because if you're on the team with the weaker tanks, all it takes is one living Tiger II to finish off the rest of the team. I see it happen all the time. So, ladies and gentlemen, with all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed my look at World of Tanks version 9.0. And if you've never played World of Tanks and you're wondering what all the fuss is about, then I've got a link in the description below. Give it a shot. It's a free-to-play game. You've got nothing to lose but some time. And I really need more people in historical battles, so the more the merrier. With that said, I will definitely see you on the next one.